Hey, it's Bilal, and this is Deep Sea, a podcast about seeing the world more deeply. Over the years, I've had good managers and I've had bad managers, and I myself have at times been a bad manager and a good manager. Through these experiences, I found the advice of Peter Drucker the most transformative for me. Drucker was one of the first management gurus, and his 1967 book, The Effective Executive, has to be the best management book ever written. All others, in my view, are simply a footnote to his book. On this podcast, I'm going to run through the key elements from his approach that made a difference to me, and share Drucker's insights on important aspects of corporate life. So let's begin where Drucker begins himself, that top leadership and being an effective executive starts with working on yourself. Accordingly, good management can only happen by example. Executives who don't know how to make themselves effective in their own job set the wrong example. And the job of an executive is, above all else, to get the right things done and get the organization to perform. Now, some of the reasons executives become ineffective include your time tends to belong to everyone else, that unless you change the reality around you by deliberate action, the flow of events will determine what you focus on and what you do. And that also you're within a firm. A firm is a means of multiplying the strength of an individual. The people who are most important to the effectiveness of an executive are not people who you have direct control over. Also, you see the outside only through thick and distorted lenses, if at all. All the results are on the outside. Unless you make special efforts to gain direct access to outside reality, you will become increasingly inside focused. So these are some of the challenges we have when we work within an organization. But importantly, effectiveness can be learned. It's a habit which have essentially 5 practices, according to Peter Drucker. Number 1, you have to know where your time goes. Number 2, you have to focus on outward contribution. Number 3, you have to build on strengths, not weaknesses. Number 4, you have to concentrate on the few major areas where superior performance will produce outstanding results. And number 5, you have to make effective decisions, and this is like a system. So let's run through each one of these. So, number 1, know your time. Don't start with tasks, start with time. Time is the limiting factor more than money. And there's 7 steps to manage time. Number 1, record your actual time use. Look at it regularly to avoid drift into old habits. Number 2, eliminate things that don't need to be done. Ask yourself, what would happen if this was not done at all? Learn to say no if an activity contributes nothing to your firm. Number 3, which activity can be done by someone else just as well, if not better? Delegate even if you think you should be doing that part of your job. Number 4, don't waste the time of others. Ask others, what do I do that wastes your time without contributing to your effectiveness? Number 5, identify time wasters that come from a poor system or poor foresight. The classic symptom to look for here is the recurrent crisis, that crisis that keeps coming back year after year. A crisis that recurs a second time is a crisis that must not occur again. Typically, the annual NGO review process belongs here. It should be foreseen and turned into routine. Often, though, the NGO review is a period of crisis where people frantically run around and waste a huge amount of resources and time. A well-managed firm is a quiet place. Number 6, overstaffing leads to time wasting. A too big workforce spends an increasing time interacting rather than working. A reliable symptom of this is if senior people spend more and more time dealing with feuds and clashes. And finally, number 7, a common time waster is bad organization. A telltale sign is too many meetings. In an ideal structure, there would be no meetings, as everybody would know what he needs to know to do his job. Every meeting that happens generates a host of little follow-up meetings. Meetings have to be an exception, not the rule. It should never be the main demand on the executive's time. Okay, now the second practice to being a top executive. What can I contribute? Many worry about what the firm or their boss owes them. Above all, they care about the authority they should have. But if you focus your effort on imposing your rank, you become ineffective. Instead, if you focus on contribution and take responsibility for results, no matter how junior you are, you become top management. The most common cause of executive failure is the inability or unwillingness to change with the demands of a new position. If you keep doing what you did successfully before you moved, then you are almost bound to fail. And constantly ask yourself, what can I do that no one else can do, which if done really well, would make a real difference to the company? Importantly, the objective of a firm is not to breed all-rounders, but to enable specialists to be effective. So in relation to others, ask, what contribution from me do you require to make your contribution to the organization? When do you need this, and how do you need it, and in what form? Now, the third practice, making strengths productive. The effective executive makes strengths productive. You can't build on weakness. You have to use all available strengths, the strengths of associates, the strengths of the superior, and one's own strengths. Effective executives know their subordinates are paid to perform and not please their superiors. They never ask, how do they get along with me? Rather, what do they contribute? A top executive never asks, what can a person not do? But, what can they do uncommonly well? And it's important to have diversity. And to enable that, relationships must be task-focused rather than personality-focused. Achievement must be measured against objective criteria of contribution and performance. Otherwise, the focus will be on who's right rather than what is right. Now, when it comes to performance reviews and interviews, you need to ask 4 questions. Number 1, what have you done well in the past? Number 2, what therefore are they likely to be able to do well in the future? Number 3, what do they have to learn to be able to get the full benefit from their strength? And finally, if I had a son or daughter, would I be willing to have them work under this person? And if yes, why? And if no, why not? All these questions focus on strengths, and weaknesses are seen as limitations to the full use of their strengths. The last question, though, about your son and daughter working for this person, is the only one primarily focused on weakness. Subordinates tend to mold themselves after a forceful boss. So there is nothing more destructive in a firm than a forceful but basically corrupt executive. Such a person might operate well on their own and be tolerable if denied all powers over others, but in a position of power within a firm, they create a toxic culture which could destroy the firm. Okay, the fourth practice, first things first. If there's one secret of effectiveness, it's concentration. The more you focus on big contributions, the more you'll require fairly big, continuous chunks of time. The more you switch from being busy to achieving results, the more you will shift to sustained efforts. This requires self-discipline and an iron determination to say no. The people who get nothing done often work a great deal harder. They underestimate the time of any task. They expect everything will go right, yet everyone knows nothing ever goes right. The unexpected always happens, and almost never is it a pleasant surprise. Therefore, allow a fair margin of time beyond what is actually needed. It's not a race. Set an easy pace and keep going steady. If we had to come up with some rules of concentration, these would include get rid of the past that has ceased to be productive. So periodically review work programs and ask, if we did not already do this, would we go into it now? Unless the answer is an unconditional yes, we have to drop it. People are forever bailing out the past. Another rule of concentration would be a decision has to be made on which tasks deserve priority and which are of less importance. You can make that decision, or you can let circumstances do it for you. However, circumstances always favor the yesterday and what goes on inside the firm rather than outside, and it favors crisis over opportunity, the immediate over the real. So setting priorities is easy, but the challenge is deciding what tasks not to tackle and sticking to the decision. So courage rather than analysis dictates the truly important rules for identifying priorities. So remember to pick the future against the past, focus on opportunity rather than the problem, choose your own direction rather than climb on any bandwagon, and aim high, aim for something that will make a difference rather than something that's safe and easy to do. Now the final practice is to make effective decisions. So concentrate on the important decisions. Don't get impressed by speed in decision making. Rather, see juggling lots of ideas at once as a symptom of sloppy thinking. You need to have the patience to want to know what the decision is all about and what the underlying realities are which it has to satisfy. The elements of effective decision making include: is this a generic situation or an exception? The generic always has to be answered through a rule or principle. Another element is to make clear specifications as to what the decision has to accomplish. What are the objectives of the decision? What are the minimum goals it has to attain? Another element is to convert the decision to action. So ask yourself, who has to know this decision? What action has to be taken? Who is to take it? What does the action have to be so that people who have to do it can do it? The first and last of these are too often overlooked, with dire results. In the end, a decision is a judgment. It's a choice between alternatives. It's rarely a choice between right and wrong. When making decisions, you need to know that you don't start with facts, rather you start with opinions. And these opinions are nothing but untested hypotheses, and as such worthless unless tested against reality. The right decision grows out of the clash and conflict of divergent opinions and out of the serious consideration of competing alternatives. Therefore, the first rule in decision-making is that one does not make a decision unless there is disagreement. Disagreement alone can provide alternatives to a decision. A decision without an alternative is a desperate gambler's throw, no matter how carefully thought through it might be. Now, when a decision is made, we have to remember that every decision is like surgery. It's an intervention into a system and therefore carries with it the risk of shock. When everything's known, it's clear what course of action must be taken. It's at this point that most decisions are lost. It becomes suddenly quite obvious that the decision is not going to be pleasant, is not going to be popular, and is not going to be easy. It becomes clear that the decision requires courage as much as it requires judgment. And one thing that effective executive will not do at this point is to give in to the request of, let's make another study. This is the coward's way. And all the coward ever achieves is to die 1,000 deaths when the brave one dies just once. Okay, so I covered lots of ground on this podcast, so let me provide a brief summary. Good management starts by example, yet the organizational mass and structure naturally pulls managers into becoming ineffective. To overcome this, you need to focus on 5 practices. Number 1, know where your time goes. Number 2, focus on outward contribution. Number 3, build on strengths, not weaknesses. Number 4, concentrate on the few major areas where superior performance will produce outstanding results. And finally, number 5, make effective decisions. Druckers' advice has stayed with me, so I'd urge you to follow his timeless wisdom. For more details, refer to my show notes for this episode. Thanks for listening, and please tell a friend about the podcast, leave a rating on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, or wherever you go for your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @BalalHafiz123. You can also follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or on my blog, balalhafiz.com. I'll be back soon, so tune in there.